That night, when her eyes met mine, it wasn't just a glance. It felt like a silent confession, as if she had been waiting for me all along. The night had that kind of softness only late summer seems to hold. The air warm enough to wrap around me, carrying the faint perfume of blooming flowers mixed with the earthy scent of grass. Lanterns were strung along the edges of the garden, their glow gentle and golden, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. Laughter drifted from the center of the gathering, where family and friends exchanged stories, clinking glasses, and cheerful noise. Yet, just beyond that warmth, in a pocket of quiet light, she stood. Her presence caught me before I even realized I was looking for it. She held a slender glass of red wine in one hand, her fingers poised with an ease that seemed natural, unforced. The light touched the edges of her figure like it had been arranged to flatter her alone, revealing the graceful line of her shoulders, the curve of her profile, the composed stillness of someone comfortable in her own silence. She wasn't trying to command attention, but that subtle separation from the crowd made her impossible not to notice. Her eyes weren't fixed on anyone in particular. Instead, they wandered upward, tracing the night sky where the stars were beginning to scatter across the darkening blue. It looked almost as if she was waiting for something, or someone. There was a weight to the way the night had thinned into that tender hour when conversations soften, when the edges of laughter fade into murmurs, and the air seems heavier with meaning. Most of the guests had drifted toward the brighter parts of the garden, clumping together near the music and the food, leaving little pockets of quiet at the edges. That was where she walked, slowly, as if she wanted a pause from the bustle. Without thinking too much, I followed, though I kept enough distance not to seem intrusive. She found a spot beneath the arching branches of an old oak tree, where a wooden bench sat half in shadow, half in the warm glow of a hanging lantern. She lowered herself onto it with a graceful ease, her posture relaxed but thoughtful, as though she were seeking a moment of refuge. I hesitated only a heartbeat before taking the open space beside her. The wood was cool beneath me, the faint scent of moss and leaves drifting from the ground. We didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. The closeness was quiet, almost tentative. She angled slightly toward me, her arm resting along the back of the bench, so near that the warmth of her sleeve brushed the edge of my shoulder whenever she shifted. My awareness sharpened. Every small movement, every sound of her breathing seemed amplified. The gap between us was only inches, but it carried a weight, charged like a current waiting for contact. I could hear the music faintly from the other side of the garden, but here, the night belonged to us. She let her hand drop from the back of the bench, fingers dangling close to mine. The space between our hands seemed suddenly important, like a question lingering in the air. My pulse quickened, but I didn't force it. I simply let my hand remain where it was, steady, letting her know through stillness that if she wanted to bridge the gap, I would not pull away. When she glanced sideways, our eyes caught again. In her gaze was something unspoken, not boldness, but recognition, as if she felt the same fragile pull I did and was quietly weighing the risk of leaning into it. Her lips parted slightly, the faintest trace of a smile appearing before she turned her gaze forward again. That almost smile held me, as though it had left a mark on my chest. The air between us thickened with possibility. My shoulders shifted the tiniest bit closer, not enough to press against her, but enough to shorten the space. She didn't move away. That silence stretched out, full but not uncomfortable, like the held breath of a moment that neither of us wanted to end. I realized then that it wasn't about words. It was about presence, two people sitting side by side, letting the night wrap around them, finding comfort in the nearness of someone who felt strangely like they had always belonged there. It was a fragile kind of closeness, but it was the beginning of something neither of us could ignore. The stillness of the garden wrapped around us like a blanket, softening the hum of the gathering in the distance. We sat there for a while without speaking, content in the nearness, until she broke the silence with a sigh that seemed to carry more than just the weight of the evening. It wasn't heavy, but thoughtful, the kind of exhale that invites someone to notice. I turned slightly toward her, giving her my attention, though I didn't say a word. Her voice, when it came, was steady but low, as though it belonged to the night itself. She began by speaking of simple things, the way she loved gardens, how this one reminded her of summers long ago when life had felt lighter, freer. Her words drifted gently at first, like ripples across still water. But soon, as the quiet encouraged her, she allowed more to slip through. She spoke of her work, how it kept her occupied but rarely fulfilled her. Then she spoke of evenings spent in silence, returning home to a house that was comfortable but too quiet. There was no bitterness in her tone, only an honesty that felt rare. As she talked, her gaze remained mostly forward, fixed on the lantern light and the shadows it cast across the grass. It was as if she was sharing pieces of herself with the night, trusting me to simply witness. I found myself holding on to every word, not because I felt I had to respond, but because she made me want to. There was something magnetic in her openness, the way her vulnerability was wrapped in composure. She wasn't seeking pity, she was offering truth. At one point, her eyes flickered toward me, hesitant, searching. I met them without flinching, letting her see that I wasn't judging, that I wasn't retreating. I nodded slightly, just enough to assure her that I was here, that her words had a place to land. She exhaled again, softer this time, like she had released something she hadn't realized she was holding. The distance between us seemed smaller after that. I noticed the way her hands rested in her lap, fingers fidgeting absently with the rim of her glass, betraying the quiet storm beneath her calm exterior. For a moment, I wanted to reach out to still those restless movements with the gentleness of my hand. But I didn't. Not yet. It was enough to listen. In that exchange, her voice unfolding, my silence steady, I felt a bond form, delicate but strong. She was letting me see her not as the graceful, untouchable woman she appeared to be under the lantern light, but as someone who carried loneliness, hope, and longing in equal measure. And in her eyes, I thought I glimpsed gratitude, as if the act of being heard was itself a kind of closeness. That night, her stories were not just words. They were a gift, an opening, and I felt the quiet certainty that something deeper had begun to root itself between us. The garden seemed to fall deeper into silence as she finished her story, her words dissolving into the night air. I could still feel the weight of what she'd shared, and though I wanted to respond, to offer something meaningful in return, my voice felt locked in my chest. Sometimes silence is its own reply, and I sensed she understood that. Her lips curved into a soft, tired smile, and the faint lantern light revealed the lines of strength and gentleness that time had traced across her face. I said something small, light-hearted, almost clumsy, trying to ease the heaviness that had settled between us. I can't remember the exact words, only that they made her laugh, a quiet, melodic sound that felt unguarded. It wasn't the practiced laughter people use in conversation. It was real, slipping out of her like she hadn't expected it. That sound warmed me, lifted the moment into something fragile and tender. As her laughter faded, her hand moved almost unconsciously, brushing against my forearm. The contact was feather-light at first, like the whisper of fabric against skin, but it was enough to stir my pulse. My body reacted before my thoughts could catch up, my breath tightening, my senses sharpening to that single point of touch. Her fingers lingered, not retreating right away. They rested lightly, as though testing the ground between us, searching for permission in silence. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I let the warmth of her touch sink in, steady and deliberate. Inside me, there was a rush of electricity, but also a surprising calm. It felt right, as if this simple contact was the most natural thing in the world, even though it carried the weight of unspoken meaning. I glanced at her, unsure if she would meet my eyes. She did. Her gaze was steady, but questioning, a flicker of vulnerability there, like she was asking, "Asterisk, is this too much? Should I pull away?" Asterisk, I answered with stillness, with the faintest shift of my arm closer to hers, enough to let her know I welcomed it. The silence between us grew dense, but not awkward. It was charged, humming with a quiet intensity that neither of us named. I became acutely aware of everything. The warmth of her skin against mine, the way her breath slowed slightly as if she, too, was caught in the gravity of the moment. Her touch didn't ask for more, yet it promised something. It wasn't bold or rushed. It was careful, intentional, as though she understood how fragile beginnings can be. And though it lasted only a few seconds before she gently withdrew, the absence of her touch left a tingling echo along my arm, as if my body refused to let it go. That single touch, so small, shifted everything. It was the bridge between her stories and my silence, between her vulnerability and my patience. It was the first step into something unspoken but undeniable, the first gesture that carried the weight of more than friendship, more than chance. It was a question left hanging in the night, and my heart had already answered it. The night had settled into that still, unbroken calm that comes only after most of the laughter has faded and the last echoes of conversation drift somewhere far off. The lanterns flickered softly, their light brushing across her face, carving delicate shadows along her cheekbones and catching in her eyes. I could still feel the memory of her touch lingering on my arm, the warmth of it alive beneath my skin, as if the night itself was reluctant to let it fade. We sat close, not pressed together, but near enough that the space between us felt like a living thing, pulsing with something neither of us dared name. My heart was steady but strong, each beat a reminder that I was acutely aware of her presence. I could hear the faint rustle of leaves above us, the low hum of the evening air, and beneath it all, the rhythm of her breathing, calm, but not entirely untroubled. For a while, neither of us spoke. It was as if words would only fracture the fragile stillness we had built. Then she turned toward me, slowly, deliberately, her profile shifting into full view. When her gaze caught mine, the world seemed to stop. Her eyes, I had noticed them before, the depth, the quiet intelligence, the softness, but now they held something entirely different. It wasn't just a glance, not the casual acknowledgement of two people sharing space. It was deeper, layered, a silent confession in the form of a look. There was vulnerability in it, yes, but also certainty, as though she had been holding back for so long, and in this moment, finally allowed herself to be seen. The intensity of her gaze stole my breath. It was not demanding, not forceful, yet it carried weight, as though she was telling me something she couldn't put into words. I felt my chest tighten, a warmth spreading upward, filling the hollow spaces inside me I hadn't known were empty. I didn't know what to do, whether to reach for her hand, to say something, to lean closer. But in truth, none of that seemed necessary. Her eyes said it all. They told me she had been waiting, not necessarily for me, not in any preordained way, but waiting for this, to be seen, to be understood, to allow herself to feel again. And in her look, I saw the unspoken invitation. Don't look away. I didn't. I held her gaze, letting the silence say what words couldn't. My heart beat harder, but I stayed steady, giving her the same thing she gave me. Recognition, acceptance, something real. The air between us thickened, heavy with a tenderness that bordered on ache. In that moment, everything shifted. She was no longer just the woman I had noticed across the garden, no longer just a presence that intrigued me. She was someone I felt tied to, bound by the quiet electricity of that look. It was the kind of gaze that changes everything, the kind that tells you you've stepped across an invisible line and that nothing from this moment onward will ever feel the same again. Eventually, the night had to end. The lanterns burned lower, the garden quieted to a hush, and the sounds of departing guests reached us faintly from a distance. Yet neither of us moved to stand. It was as if we both knew that rising too quickly would shatter the delicate thread woven between us. She shifted first, not away, but closer. Her hand, which had rested loosely in her lap, slid gently toward mine. There was no hesitation this time, no half measure. Her fingers found the back of my hand and lingered there, soft and steady, before folding fully into my palm. The warmth of her touch spread through me, grounding me in a way words never could. I curled my fingers around hers instinctively, answering the unspoken promise she had offered. For a moment, we just sat like that, our hands joined between us, neither pulling back. I looked down at the way her hand fit against mine, graceful and certain, then up into her face. She was watching me with a tenderness that felt both unfamiliar and inevitable, as though it had been waiting beneath the surface all along. "I should probably go," she whispered, her voice colored with a trace of reluctance, but softened by a smile that told me she didn't quite want to. "I know," I replied quietly, but neither of us moved. When we finally rose, it was slow, as though every step back into the noise of the world had to be measured. Still holding hands, we walked side by side toward the brighter lights, our strides naturally falling in rhythm. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a grand declaration. It was something quieter, but perhaps stronger because of it, the steady recognition that we had crossed into new territory together. At the edge of the garden, with a path curved back toward the house, she paused. The lantern light brushed her features, and in that glow, she looked at me once more. Not the searching look from before, not the intense gaze that had stolen my breath, but something softer, calmer. A look of trust. Her thumb brushed lightly across my knuckles before she finally let go of my hand. The absence left an ache, but not an emptiness. It felt more like the marking of a beginning, a silent promise that this wasn't the end of our story. We walked the final steps together, shoulders brushing, our silence filled with a warmth I carried with me long after. The night had started with distance, with glances across a crowded garden, but it ended with closeness, with a quiet bond born not from words, but from presence, touch, and the courage of being seen. As the lights of the house spilled around us and the night folded closed, I realized the truth. She had looked at me that evening as though she had been waiting all along. And perhaps, without knowing it, I had been waiting too.